Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. My best friend the Wendigo. This story was shared by you/Kessel the Viking, so credits to him. Sometimes things happen to us that we just cannot explain. No matter how many resources are available or what information we can find, there are things that can never be understood, and that is a commanding factor of life. Now, a question. I know some, if not many of you have had friends, even best friends that disappear from your life without a rhyme or reason. That very same thing happened to me with my friend Marcus. We were best friends throughout high school and carried the friendship on well into our 20s, but one day he simply disappeared. I don't mean he was reported missing and the police were involved. I just mean he left without telling me, his best friend. I spoke to his mother and she said he had gone on a trip to northern Alaska. When I asked her why, she said, he never gave me a reason. I could hear the sorrowful tone in her voice. Like myself, she missed him too. But out of nowhere he came back. He told no one he had returned, and one day he showed up on my doorstep as if he had never left. I admit he looked good, better than I remembered. He seemed healthy, if you can understand. Marcus, you're back, I remarked, bewildered. Yeah, man, he said in a smooth demeanor. He had his hands tucked into the pockets of the jean jacket he was wearing. Got back a couple days ago. You look well. Where you been, man? I asked casually. I noticed his face was flushed red, but it was probably just the lighting outside because the sun was setting. Yeah, thanks. I've just been traveling, finding myself. He answered, but he seemed indifferent about conversation. It made me wonder why he came here if he wasn't looking to talk. Well, that's cool. Did you want to come in? I asked while gesturing my hand through the door. He nodded and brushed past me into my home. Thanks, Derek, he said nonchalantly, as if this was a routine occurrence. Something up? I asked as I closed the door behind me. Marcus flipped his wavy blonde hair and sighed. No, not really. I just have a proposition for you. It was strange that this was how he decided to start the first conversation between us in a long time. A proposition? Forgive me for saying this, but we haven't spoken in quite some time, man, and I don't know if I'm really in the position to dive headfirst into something new. No, it's not like that, began Marcus. He didn't appear slighted by my response, which was welcoming to see. I was just wondering if you'd be interested in coming with me on a trip. A vacation of sorts. It wouldn't be long, just a week up north. With who? You? I asked with a hint of scrutiny. Yeah, just me, he said quickly. For some reason, his fingers were twitching like he could barely control himself from having a breakdown of some kind. Why so sudden? And why me? I mean, Marcus, where have you actually been this whole time? I find it strange you would come to me of all people for this hurried request of yours. I need someone to come with me. It's important that you understand, Derek. I'm not the same person I was when I left. I am something much more unique. But I cannot be left to the masses. I must be quelled. He was speaking in completely vague sentences, the context of which I couldn't understand. I have to be honest with you, Marcus. I don't know what the fuck you're saying to me right now. I wasn't going to lie, but I saw a slight shift in his eyes upon hearing my candor. He sat down in my recliner and clasped his hands together. Listen, are you in or not? He wouldn't even look me in the face when he asked. He simply hung his head with his eyes on the floor. Well, I don't know. Where would we be going exactly? A cabin up north. Once we get there, I'll give you a list of instructions that you must adhere to. I promise you will understand. I took a deep breath. Clearly, Marcus was in distress and needed help. I wasn't going to leave him to fend off against whatever demons were riding his shoulders. I figured he had become an addict and wanted someone to look after him while he got himself cleaned up. I suppose. I said quietly. Awesome. Thanks, Derek. He said hastily, you won't have to pay for anything. I've got that all covered. Just be ready tomorrow morning, and we will head up there. Tomorrow? Damn, that's definitely short notice. I said, already thinking about what I would tell my boss. Don't worry about work, man. Just trust me, even if you've never trusted anyone. He remarked as if he read my mind. He then stood up and began walking to the door. I don't know what happened to you, but something's definitely different. I mentioned as I opened the door for him. You don't know the half of it. He said before walking outside. See you in the morning. Bring anything you're comfortable with bringing, but don't overpack. I nodded even though he was facing away from me, and he walked off down the sidewalk. How'd he got here? Obviously, he didn't drive if he was walking. Something seriously weird was going on with him. My boss was fine with me taking some time off. I figured it wouldn't actually last a week anyway, so in my head all would be well. The next morning I was ready to go and Marcus arrived just after 9 a.m. to pick me up. I brought my things outside. I had only packed some snacks, a flashlight, blankets, a pillow, my medication, and several outfits for the outdoors of life. The cabin has beds and blankets, said Marcus from the driver's seat of the old SUV he arrived in. Yet, well, I prefer to feel a sense of comfort that I can only achieve by having things that belong to me. If you say so, he remarked. His lack of engagement was already growing stale. I got in the passenger seat and we sped away without another word shared between us. Every so often, I would glance at Marcus to study him. While he did seem healthy, there was something innately different about him that I couldn't put my finger on. He was jittery, easily startled, and on edge. We drove for a good 6 hours before pulling off at a rest area. Marcus seemed alert, but for some reason he said, "We're going to sleep here for the night." The night? Have you gone blind, dude? It's barely 3 in the afternoon. Yes, I know. I'm hungry and I need to rest, said Marcus quietly. I can drive, man, if that's the issue, I asked reassuringly. He turned to look at me with viciously bloodshot eyes as if he had been staring at the sun the entire drive. No, you don't know the way. You can tell me the way? I have GPS? No, Derek. Just close your eyes or do something for a bit. I'm hungry. The way he said hungry was like a ravenous animal, like his desire to feed was overthrowing his decision-making. Fine, fine. Go get something to eat then, I said, kicking my feet up on the dash and leaning the seat back. Marcus stammered when he responded, no, not yet. When night falls, I will. You're acting really strange, man. Is everything good? Instead of responding, he only nodded slowly. I didn't say anything back, but I did watch him from the corner of my eye for some time. I noticed he was watching every single person who walked into the rest stop, like a starving fiend. I passed the time by reading on my phone, listening to music through my headphones, and after night fell, I closed my eyes. Up until I decided to try and sleep, Marcus hadn't taken his eyes off the entrance of the rest stop. I can't even recall if I saw him blink once. Luckily, I managed to fall asleep relatively quickly. However, I was awoken abruptly when Marcus heaved his body back into the driver's seat as if he were running from something. He was absolutely covered in blood, his mouth and most of his face, his hands, his shirt and pants, everywhere. And Marcus, what the fuck, man? I asked intensely. He swallowed audibly. I feel better now. We can keep going. I could see his teeth stained red from the dim light produced by the rest area. No way, man. You're going to tell me what happened to you. Without looking at me, he said, I had to eat, Derek. We all have to eat. What in the fuck are you talking about, Marcus? What did you eat? A barrel of blood. Not quite. He then started the vehicle and shifted it into reverse. I reached out and shifted it back into park. When I did, he turned towards me and grabbed my wrist. His grip was insurmountably strong. It felt like he could crush my arm if he had the mind to do it. "Derek, let go," was all he said while his entire body was visibly trembling. I didn't know what else to do, so I listened. I carefully brought my hand back to my lap, and he shifted into reverse once more before bringing us back onto the freeway. I couldn't keep my eyes off him, but he wouldn't look at me anymore. Not until we reached the cabin. The overwhelming smell of blood had filled the vehicle, and I had gagged a few times from it. The pungent aroma wafting off Marcus was almost unbearable. I checked my phone. Of course, there was no signal out here, and I caught a glimpse of him watching me from the other side of the SUV. "Calling the police is futile," said Marcus through his blood-stained teeth. "Tell me what you did back there." I shouted at him, unsure of what else to say. "I did what I had to," he said while walking towards the front door of the cabin. "Marcus, please, man. I can help. Just tell me what's going on." He froze as if he really was about to answer me, but instead he reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. Then he unlocked the door and went in without saying another word. I stood outside for a long time. I didn't want to go inside and see him sitting there painted with blood, but something told me that Marcus needed help, so I went in. He was sitting on a dusty couch in fresh clothes. He must have showered too, because his skin was clear of the red tinge that had dominated it before. One thing was different, though. He had lost most of his hair. I don't mean little clumps or bald spots. I mean there were only a few strands of hair remaining. Furthermore, he had patches of raw skin on his face, and I'm sure they were on his body as well. I sat in a chair across from him and observed his seemingly deteriorating form. His eyes were fixed on the rickety floorboards beneath us, and he had his palms placed flat on his thighs. After 5 solid minutes without so much as a twitch, he finally raised his head. His eyes met mine, but his were almost black. There were dark blue veins forming a web pattern from the corners of his eye sockets, and his lips were dry and cracked. When he spoke, it was with a breathy and raspy tone. "I'm going to tell you a story, Derek. When I am finished, you will do something for me. You cannot say no. You must do it. I can't make promi dash. You must." Marcus suddenly shouted. He had raised himself up further, but something wasn't right. His spine was longer somehow, like it had been stretched, making him appear much taller even when sitting down. Okay, I said timidly. His shouting struck a drastically fearful chord within me. "Good," he mumbled under his breath. Then he began his story. "As you know, I went to Alaska. It wasn't for nothing. I had actually met a girl up there on an app." He grinned slightly, but it quickly faded. When I say this, I mean it. She was perfect. Well, for me at least. He stopped for a moment, and I noticed he was eyeing my hands, but then he continued. "Anyway, her name was Claire, and we really hit it off. It was one of those love at first sight moments. Seriously, Derek, she was everything I could have ever wanted or needed in a woman." I uttered a sound of acknowledgement, so he knew I was listening as he went on. "She was a simple person, and she lived in an old town. I can't even remember the name of it now, but we made a life for ourselves there. However, she started acting strange. She would ask to have guests over constantly as if I wasn't enough. I don't say that in a jealous way. I mean, she literally wanted someone else over every single day, and she reeked of desperation. It was like her life depended on it." While he spoke, one of his fingernails fell off and landed with a quiet ticking sound on the floor. Marcus didn't seem to mind because he kept talking. Eventually, I caved. I invited one of her friends over, a local guy who worked at the town's bakery. About an hour before he arrived, Claire called me into the bedroom. She had this weird, almost evil tone in her voice, but I disregarded it. I thought that she may have been looking to get intimate before this friend of hers arrived, but that wasn't the case at all. "Are you sick, Marcus?" I asked as I watched 2 more fingernails slide off his fingers onto the floor. He didn't answer me, not directly anyway. He looked up at me, and his left eye clouded over with a milky white color. Was he dying right before me? Marcus picked at one of the scaly gray patches of skin on his hand. It only made his other nails fall off, but he didn't seem to mind or notice because he went on. As I entered our bedroom, the door closed behind me. Claire was standing there with a rope and a gag. That only solidified my assumption about her need for intimacy, so I let her tie me up. But instead of getting frisky, she gagged me and left the room. I tried to get her attention, but obviously she couldn't hear me. "How long were you like that?" I asked gently. I wanted him to feel like I had genuine interest. "Longer than I expected." I heard her friend come inside, and I tried to yell to get his attention, but it was no use. That's when the screams started. There were horrendous noises of agony coming from the other room, and they weren't from Claire. He sighed again faintly. During the conversation, his entire body had begun turning a pale gray color, and the last bits of hair he had left fell to the floor. There was this squelching sound and another sound I can only liken to a saw-cutting mate. I hated every moment being tied to that bed in our barely lit room. "Where are you going with all of this, Marcus? Are you saying Claire killed her friend?" "She didn't just kill him, Derek. She ate him." "What?" I exclaimed vehemently as my stomach turned. "Yeah, she ate him, and when she was full, she brought the scraps of what was left into the bedroom. She removed the gag and told me if I didn't eat, she would consume my flesh as well." Did you do it?" I asked with curiosity. He looked down and then up before slowly nodding. "I did. Marcus. Man, I don't know what to say. Just keep listening," he said solemnly. I had to hold my mouth open while she let the blood of her friend drip inside. She told me that if I did, then I'd never be sick again. I'd never worry about anything but eating. It made me remember all the times she had gone out for the night only to come back looking more youthful than before. I shifted in the chair and Marcus stared at my hands again for far too long. I was growing uncomfortable by his lustful gaze. The next time he spoke, his voice had diminished into something gravelly and hoarse. I did not fight her. I did what she asked. I hoped that she had just lost her mind, and when she was satisfied, I'd make my escape. But I was wrong. The flesh, that is, the consumption of it made me a new being. It gave me strength, vitality, and an iron constitution. I felt the best I had ever felt in years, but then came the hunger. Hunger? I questioned calmly, although I was reminded of when he mentioned how hungry he was at the rest area. Yes, Derek. The hunger for human flesh was insatiable. It didn't matter how much I ate. My body would feel like it had been further deprived of sustenance. I craved warm, running blood, almost like a vampire, and Claire did too. Before we knew it, we had slaughtered the entire town and nobody saw it coming. But after that, Claire, she turned into something feral, something less human and more animalistic. Like you are now? I asked with a hint of concern. Yes, she became this creature. It was grotesque and malformed. She wasn't my Claire anymore. So, I did what any loving partner would do. I put her out of her misery. You killed her. I ended her suffering. I see. That's when I came back down here. I couldn't live up there alone, but I also realized I couldn't be left alive at all. Derek, I desperately want to be with Claire again, whether there's still a place for my soul in heaven or if I'll be sentenced to an eternal hell for the things I've done. As long as Claire's there, I'll be happy. What are you saying exactly, Marcus? I want you to kill me. You. What? I admit, I chuckled a little because the notion was ridiculous. I want you to take the shotgun out of the gun safe and blow my fucking head off so I can't devour another innocent person. Marcus was being serious. I could tell by his tone, and the longer this conversation went on, the more his body changed. I finally managed to ask the question I desperately wanted to know the answer to. Did you eat someone at the rest area? I ate an entire family, he said without remorse. I didn't know what to say. What could you say? All I could do was gasp while remaining at a loss for words. I called the police from the pay phone afterwards, so they should be there now. He began harshly. I chose that particular rest area because the cameras don't work. I had staked it out before even coming to you. It was all planned. But I did it for you. For me. You ate an entire family for me. No. I made it so you couldn't be connected to what happened. The police are none the wiser, and in reality, you've done nothing wrong. This is fucked up, Marcus. I know. I'm sorry, Derek. I need you to honor my request now, though, before it's too late. What happens if I don't? I asked out of curiosity. Marcus stood up hulkingly tall and groaned a bellowing, low, rumbling roar. You cannot deny my desire for death. In my pain, like I ended the pain for Claire. His breathing was rapid and fierce, but he managed to calm himself down. I apologize for scaring you, he said in his gruff voice. Marcus, you were my best friend once. I can't kill you. You have to. This is why I came to you, because you still are my best friend, and I didn't want to ask a random stranger. They wouldn't understand, but you can understand. His face grew long, and it was accompanied by many painful grunts by Marcus. I need you to do this for me. I do not want to hurt anyone else. Even now the hunger calls to me. It is taking every ounce of strength I have left to resist lashing out at you and devouring every tasty morsel of flesh covering your ripe and ravishingly delicious body. He shook his head like a madman before his eyes met mine once again. Please, Derek. I am begging you. I don't know what changed in me, but hearing my once best friend pleading for his death no longer perturbed my emotions. I stared at his rapidly transforming body for an indeterminate amount of time before getting up and walking to the gun safe. It was already unlocked. He must have done that while I waited outside. I reached in and grabbed the only gun in the case, the shotgun Marcus had mentioned. I assumed it was already loaded. If Marcus had planned this much, then surely he planned that too. I walked back to the chair and sat down, and a gnarled, black-toothed grin spread on Marcus's veiny, gray face. Thank you, Derek. I can't live with myself any longer, and this is the best option. Do not take pity on me. Do not feel guilty or ashamed. Take pride in the fact that you have expelled a ruthless creature from this world. I pumped the shotgun and aimed it at his head. My heart was pounding and my hands were sweating. Oh, one more thing, he remarked. In the glove box of the SUV are my life savings. Take it all and do with it what you will. I ask that you never tell my mother about this, or anyone else. It will be our secret. He then took one last deep breath. Okay. I'm ready. Do it. Just as I was pulling the trigger, Marcus's body twisted and contorted into a far more disturbing visage, and as the shot rang throughout the cabin, his blood and viscera splattered against the couch, the floors, the walls, and even the ceiling. His painful shrieking stopped, and his body ceased all movements. It was over. I sat there with the shotgun in my lap, still aimed at Marcus's corpse for most of the day. I couldn't bring myself to get up, or do anything else but stare at my headless former best friend. Eventually, I found the will to stand. After I was on my wobbly 2 feet, I took a sheet from one of the bedrooms and draped it over Marcus. I searched the entire grounds of the cabin for a shovel because I wanted to bury him, but I couldn't find one. It was cold outside anyway, and I'm sure he wouldn't want me to die from digging his grave. I did, however, find some matches. It was the middle of winter, so I thought it would be better to just burn the cabin down. I didn't want Marcus's body to rot there on the cold couch, and as I dropped a lit match on it, the fabric immediately engulfed into a mighty blaze. I walked out of the cabin and got into the driver's seat of the SUV. And that's when I remembered Marcus had the keys. I couldn't help but laugh about the irony of it all. Marcus had left 10 grand in the glove box for me. I ended up having to hike down the driveway and up the road until someone stopped to pick me up. They drove me to the nearest town, Grand Marais, I think it was called. It was a small town, but the people were friendly. I rented a room at their local inn and have been here for 3 days just thinking about Marcus and what he went through. I thought about if I was responsible for the family he murdered and ate, but I had no idea what was going on at the time. I was only along for the ride until I had to play my part, my role in ending Marcus's painful life. If your best friend, or even friend, returns to you after having been gone and without contact for years, be careful if they ask for you to take a trip with them. And always remember, the mysteries of the world can outweigh grounded reality. Nothing is as it seems, even Marcus. Be safe, everyone. I hope none of you look down on me. Second story. My Wendigo encounter. This story takes place in the back country of the area I grew up in. Be warned, some of this might be too frightening for some. Reader discretion is advised. So back in 2019, I remember there being a big uproar of unknown creatures roaming the forest like Bigfoot and skinwalkers. But this story isn't about them. This story is about probably one of the scariest things I think I've ever heard about. The Wendigo. A few months after one of my friends Jacob mentioned this big uproar, I went to go see him since I had been away enlisted in the United States Marines. I got back after being discharged, and one of the first things I did was go and see him. We're having a good old time, and he brought up the idea of going out to a little hangout spot his now ex-girlfriend took him to when they wanted to get away for a few hours. So I decided why not. So I grabbed my gun, and we went out to this extremely secluded area and started messing around on the old dock that was there. It had been pretty much forgotten by the looks of it, poorly maintained, and some boards were almost completely rotted through. So about 30 minutes into our shenanigans, Jacob brought up the topic of the Wendigo. The name sounded a little scary even for me. Curious, I asked him about it. He said that if you went into the woods and said Wendigo 3 times, you would come across the scariest looking thing you've ever seen. Me calling his bluff, I told him to prove it. To this day, I wished I hadn't. We start walking on this little path that lead deep into the thick woods close to the Alabama state line. We walked for maybe 20-ish minutes and decided we were in a good spot. I feel it's worth knowing that it had been raining a lot over the past couple days, so the ground was completely saturated with water. I turned to Jacob and he dares me to do it. I stood there in complete silence. The rest of the forest was almost silent as well, besides the tall pines swaying in the wind high above our heads. Reluctantly, I slowly started to say it. Wendigo, Wendigo, Wendigo. Then, nothing happened. I let out a silent sigh of relief at the fact that nothing happened. One thing about mine and Jacob's friendship is we loved it when one of us proved the other wrong about something. In our friendship of 10 years, I think it was one of the first times I had proven him wrong at anything. We started to talk a little bit of shit back and forth at each other when we heard a noise in the distance. Me still having the reflexes I had from the Marines, I immediately snapped towards the direction of the noise that were just then turning into noises. I started to move closer to the noises, and then shortly after we saw a few coyotes running across the path about 30 feet in front of us. I breathed another sigh of relief, but that relief didn't last long since I knew something was up. I didn't know what was up at first, but I just knew it was time for me and Jacob to leave. As we turned to leave the woods, all of a sudden, a tall pine tree started to groan and creak as it started to come down. Noticing this, and in a moment of pure instinct, I shoved Jacob forward as the tree came falling through the rest of the branches and landed right in between us. Jacob let out a cry of terror as the tree landed, and I hopped the tree to get to him. I could feel his heart pounding like a drum as I grabbed him by his shirt and yanked him to his feet. He was still terrified and still practically crying as I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Move, Jacob. Fucking move now." I spun him around really hard, causing him to fall to his knees. I quickly got him up, and we both started to sprint down the path back in the direction we came. I didn't dare look back, and neither did Jacob. I was sprinting through the woods when a familiar sound came from behind me. "Jacob! Jacob, come quick!" It was the sound of Jacob's younger sister, Olivia. He turned and tried to get past me. The whole time he was screaming, "Olivia!" I stopped him and said, "Jacob, look at me. It's not her. Do you hear me? It's not her." Just then another pine tree started to buckle. I saw it just in time to tackle Jacob down to the ground as both of us were nearly crushed. I screamed at Jacob once more. "Go. Get out of here. Go now." As I was screaming that, I pulled my gun out of my waistband and aimed it down the trail in the direction from whence we came. Jacob made it to the opening of the trail and turned back and noticed I was still aiming my gun down the trail. "Bradley, get out of there. Come on, hurry." I turned and started sprinting towards him. As I made it into the clearing a good 50 feet, I turned and me and Jacob both saw it. The thing we had ushered into showing itself. The Wendigo. It stood about 9 feet tall on its hind legs. There was practically no meat on its bones. It had really skinny legs and even skinnier arms. Its skin a pale white, almost like a vampire's. But the thing I noticed the most about it were the eyes. A vibrant blue, almost like lightsaber blue for those who have seen Star Wars. Having had enough fear, I raised my gun and fired at the Wendigo. Jacob, not sticking around to see if I had killed it, turned and ran towards the car. I turned and did the same thing as he passed me. That was my first experience with this so-called Wendigo, and I pray almost every night I never have to encounter something that terrifying again. Third story. I saw something terrifying while hiking in rural Appalachia. This story was shared by you/ComprehensiveN6058, so credits to him. For context, I am a professional wilderness explorer. Since I was young, my passion had been geared towards the wilderness. I have hiked on rough terrain in many countries. I know the wilderness like it was my own precious child. I research what specific wildlife lives in the area before I go hiking, so I know what to be prepared for. That's what makes this ordeal even more terrifying. One day, while browsing through a travel site for West Virginia, I saw a pop-up for a specific mountain trail. Again, nothing seemed out of the ordinary while researching, and it really seemed like the ideal hiking spot, leading up to a beautiful view showing a gorgeous blue lake. When researching the trail, it was mentioned that the area was very isolated, with the nearest town being 123 miles away. It seemed very enticing. Of course, it had the normal flora and fauna of the region, and it didn't seem odd. It did mention not to disturb the wildlife and to watch where you step because of many false footholds that would break away and cause you to fall down the cliffside. Overall, it's just the normal mountain trail. I spent about a month preparing for this trip. I made sure to contact everyone I knew so they would know where I was in case I went missing. I then drove there and started my hike. Once I got there, I relished at the beauty of it all. The start of the trail had a view of many peaks staring down at you, and I thought to myself how the view looked like giant gods towering over the world. I then started on the trail. At first, everything was fine. It was your typical mountain trail. I made sure I took a break every 15 minutes or so I didn't overwork myself and have to call quits. It was around my fifth break that things started to seem off. The birds had stopped singing, and I couldn't hear the chattering of insects. I didn't even hear the wind blowing through the trees. It was as if everything had vanished. After about 5 minutes, I started on the hike again. I was a little nervous and on edge, though, because I was the loudest thing there. It felt wrong, as though I was being watched, stared down by some malevolent force, playing with me. I continued, until around break number 20. I stopped, getting out my bottle of water, as I had done multiple times before. But as I was putting the bottle to my lips, I realized something was off. I heard twigs snapping, about 10 feet behind me. I threw my water bottle down and turned around to see what I heard. I can't describe exactly what I saw. That is a bit too difficult. The creature I saw was vaguely humanoid, bipedal, with pale, paste-like skin. Its face, though, was certainly not. It had eyes that I can only describe as being too big to fit its face. Its face, though small, still surrounded the eyes, but I swear its eyes were too big. The creature's mouth was indescribable, but I think the closest I could use for you to picture it would be to say that it was somewhere in between a human and a dog mouth, with 5 layers of knife-like teeth. Its hands were freakishly large, about the size of my arm, with long skinny fingers to match. About the rest of it, I can't really describe. It was a sort of blur, almost hard to see. That's all I remember about its lower half. I stood still, staring at the thing. It hadn't noticed me yet, but it wouldn't be long before it did. It was then that I started to sneeze, and then the creature really noticed me. It turned its head around, but instead of attacking me, it spoke. Onigie, it said, in a deep guttural voice. I don't understand, I said, confused, startled by its speaking. It looked at me, pushed its head forward, as if to say, leave. I then started to run, leaving in fear. I made sure it didn't follow, and I ran till I got to my cat. I recently tried to do research, but I haven't found anything on it. But what I do know is that it spoke in Cherokee. It told me to leave. I have researched the region and have seen that many people have come up missing there. I now think about the human-like sorrow in that creature's eyes, and I think I know why it wanted me to leave. Fourth story. The Witch of the Woods. My story begins in the summer of 2017. I had been working towards my dream position at work for over 10 years and finally felt it within my grasp. Walking out of the interview for it, I knew I was going to be picked. They hired me 2 days after, and I've been working happily ever since. The new position came with a hefty pay raise, which was only one of the big benefits, the other benefit being a company house. I couldn't believe it when they told me. Nothing about the position description stated I'd be getting free housing, but I wasn't going to complain. I was sent the address and was told I could move in any time I like, or not at all. The choice was mine. Nothing seemed off or sinister about it at the time, and honestly, I don't think the company actually knew the history behind the area. I talked it over with my wife, and we decided to take it. They said it was a large house set back in the woods about 25 minutes from my workplace. We had just welcomed our first child not 4 months before, and we figured the space and location would do us some good. I hired a moving crew, got everything packed, and off we went. The day we arrived, it took us a full 3 minutes to even drive down the long, winding driveway to the house. They told me it'd be a house, but I would actually call it an estate. The place was enormous and completely set back on its own. There was an enormous flower garden in the path, twisting and turning with beautiful plants all around. A long greenhouse spanned the length of the yard on the left side, filled with growing vegetables that we could take and eat to our pleasing. My wife and I were in awe of the whole place. It felt serene, peaceful beyond belief. It only took us a few days to settle in, and I didn't have to start work for a few more weeks. The house was actually bigger than anything we'd need. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and an entire basement. It wasn't finished, but it was very clean and the perfect place to store our unused things. The whole house was eerily clean, almost like someone had been taking care of it for a long time. I thought it was most likely the company, waiting for someone to move in. One afternoon, while the missus and kid were taking naps, I decided to roam the grounds. I got my hiking boots on, and off I went. The place was completely surrounded by trees and brush, but it was very kept. The greenhouse was glistening clean, and the veggies were delicious. The flower garden was wonderful and made the ground smell great all day. I was walking around the corner of the house when I saw what looked like a small path in the trees. It was a little out of place, just a little dirt path that looked almost like an animal trail. I walked to the edge of the woods, and that's exactly what it was. It looked like someone had walked it so much that the ground had worn in its own little path. I followed it back a while when I froze. Before me lay 2 graves, dusty and dirty, with broken headstones. They were worn so bad that the names couldn't be read, but I could catch a bit of a date, 1862-188X and 188X, XXXX. Why was a lone grave out here? Was there someone who visited it often? It would make sense with the amount of use the trail has seen. I was entranced by the stone when I heard a blood-curdling scream. Someone in the woods passed the grave. It scared me so bad I tripped over myself trying to hightail it out of there. I ran back towards the house and found my wife and child standing in the backyard looking for me. "What's wrong? Why do you look like you just saw a ghost?" They hadn't heard the scream apparently. I wasn't going to make matters worse and scare them too, so I told them I thought I saw a bear, but it was nothing. She eyed me inquisitively but took my explanation. We went back inside to have an early dinner, and the night went by smoothly. The next morning, we woke up, and I decided to grab some vegetables from the greenhouse for breakfast. Nothing goes better with eggs than some spinach. I crept downstairs so the others could sleep a while longer, threw on a robe and some sandals and headed out the door. As I walked towards the greenhouse, I heard something. It sounded like a low, patterned humming. Creeping closer, I could make out that it was a woman's voice, humming some kind of song. It was beautiful, soft, and almost mother-like. I could make out a dark figure through the frosted glass walls. I called out to it, "Hello?" The humming stopped. I walked slowly to the door and peeked in the entrance. Inside, I saw a filthy, ragged old woman looking blankly now at the produce before her. I took a step inside, and she cracked her head my direction, peering through me. She looked like she wanted to murder me. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just froze. She screamed, the same scream I heard the day before. I winced and closed my eyes, and before I knew it, the screaming stopped. She was gone, not a trace left that she was ever there. I grabbed what I needed and sprinted inside. I wanted to call the police. I should have called them, but there wasn't a good explanation for it. I didn't want to seem like a lunatic. I've heard the horror stories of getting put into psych wards against your will. No thanks to all that. I decided to brush it off. Maybe I was still stuck dreaming or something. I made breakfast, brought it up to my wife, and got on about my day. The grass needed to be mowed. It was almost the only thing that needed cleaned up on the whole property, except the destroyed graves. I figured maybe I could clean those up too. I got the mower out of the little shed and was going to start when I saw an old man walking up the drive. He called out to me first, asking if I was the new owner of the home. "No, I don't technically own it. My company pays for it." He cut me off before I could finish. "Oh, I know Redacted owns it. They've owned it for more than 100 years now," he said. I couldn't really believe what he was saying. The house was over 100 years old. It looked immaculate. There's not a thing wrong with it. Excuse me, you said 100 years? That can't be right. The house is perfect. Oh, I know it's perfect, he said. It's perfect because she keeps it perfect. She's the best housekeeper there is. Again, he wasn't making any sense. Who is this guy? There's not a house around for miles, so he's definitely not a neighbor. Who is she? Are you talking about the old lady I've seen around here? Does she still live on the property? I asked. Oh, she's on the property, but she's not living. She's the previous owner of the house. This was her home, along with her husband and child. Her name was Constance. The old man stood there for over an hour describing the situation of the property to me. I had to sit down at some point, getting dizzy with everything he told me. The house was built back in the 1870s, around 1877 to be exact. Constance and her husband had just had a child and decided to build the home for their family. Her husband had more money than they could ever need, coming from an oil family. They had an amazing life until a rival oil family paid a hitman to take him out. One day, while Constance was out of the home, men came and burned down the home with the same oil her husband made his life off of, killing both her husband and her young child. Constance came back home to a destroyed life, shattered forever. She was so distraught that she decided to join her beloved family and killed herself in the ashes of her home. Others happened upon the family days later and decided it must have been a freak accident. They buried the husband and child, but could never find the body of his wife, Constance. Over the years, people forgot about the incident, and no one paid any attention to the property. Somehow, the house was reconstructed, piece by piece to its original glory, by Constance. Her soul torn in two, anchored to the place she loved more than anything. That's who I was seeing around the property. She was angry still that others would take up residence in her home. Apparently, sometime in the 1970s, my company found the property and was able to buy it from state. They paved the driveway into the woods, straight to the perfect home. I thanked the man for his story and set myself on a mission. I was going to show Constance that we would cherish her home just as much as she did. I went out and bought some masonry materials and supplies. I waited until later in the evening and went out to the graves. I hadn't ever done much like this, so I had to learn a bit online before I tried, but I started to clean up the gravesite and put the headstones back into their places. As I got to the second stone, I heard the scream. This time, it was much closer. I looked past the site, out into the woods, and saw Constance. She looked angry, almost floating there, her hair suspended in the air. It's like she didn't know what I was doing out there, like she thought I was there to destroy what was left of the headstones. She started to walk towards me, then started sprinting. It was terrifying. I braced for what was to come, not knowing what would happen, when my wife and kid came through the trees. Constance stopped cold. She looked confused. My wife came up to me, kissed me on the cheek, and gave me her child. We stood there for a while. I don't think they could see her, but I did. I could see her demeanor change. She could see how happy we were, and then she looked down to see that I was actually trying to restore her family's headstones. I gave my kid back to my wife, fixed up the second stone, and looked up. Constance had changed. She looked beautiful, nothing like before. She had long blonde hair, flowing past a stunning maroon silk dress. This was the actual Constance, the one that loved her family and home just as much as I do mine. She nodded at me and turned, walking into the dense woods. I wish I could tell you that's how it ended, but it's not. I thought that maybe the nightmare of my story would be Constance, but it wasn't. It's not even close to what happened a few weeks later. When you're a parent, you'd do anything for your kid and your wife. I know that. Constance knew that. That's why she stayed on the property. She wanted to look after her family and home as long as she could. I would do that same, I have to say. Anyways, after I had the last encounter with Constance, things were amazing for a few weeks. The job was going well, the home was working out perfectly, and I would see Constance occasionally around the property. Sometimes humming in the garden, sometimes checking on us through the large family room window. Never creeping, always just on the edge of the woods. It was nice, actually. I felt like we were doing right by her. She was wronged, and it's the least we could do to help her find peace. One night after work, I came home to find the front door cracked open. Nothing too alarming. I'm sure it just blew open a bit. I walked in, and things were very quiet. No clinking in the kitchen, no TV in the living room, nothing. I put down my things and walked into the dining room. The table was almost set, but things were missing. As I walked around the table, I found my wife. She was out cold on the floor. I yelled for her, but she wasn't waking up. That's when I heard our child. I heard them crying upstairs and some frantic shuffling in the same room. I lunged up the stairs and swung down the hallway into their room. I stood in the doorway to find a masked man holding my child, halfway out the window. He took one look at me and jumped out onto the first floor roof. I ran immediately to the window as the man fired a few shots behind him towards me. I ducked back inside, then peeked and saw him running around the backside of the house. I hurried back downstairs to chase him, my heart beating in my throat like a drum. I made it out of the front door when I heard another shrill, blood-curdling scream. This time, though, it was not Constance. I dashed around the side to find our child laying in the grass, not a scratch on him. In front of me, through the woods, I could hear branches snapping and the now faint screaming of the man. I knew it was over. I knew we were going to be safe. My wife had woken up from the ruckus upstairs and outside and had called the police before coming to look for us. She ran over and embraced us. Apparently, he had only knocked her out before she had time to scream, so he could make his way upstairs. The police arrived and we gave our report. I told them that I thought maybe I scared him off, and he left our kid laying in the grass. They decided to look for him in the direction I last saw him running. What they found was short of a horror movie. The man was impaled on a tree, about March 4th of the way up. He had burns all over his body, like he'd been thrown into a blazing house fire. It took some poking around, but apparently this same man had been taking kids from different states for a while, and sadly, none of them ended up as lucky as mine. The police ruled us out as suspects in his murder, but I'm not so sure they even looked that hard into it. He got what was coming to him, in their eyes. As night drew nearer, the police wrapped up and asked if we would be okay, or if we wanted one of the officers there for the night. I started to think about it when I gazed past the cruisers. There was Constance at the edge of the woods, her hands looking decrepit and almost claw-like. They quickly went away, looking completely normal. She looked at me, smiled and nodded, then walked back into the woods. I told the officers I think we would manage fine. Things have been great now. It's been years since the incident, and there hasn't been anything major again. There was the time a rabid dog found its way to the property as our child was playing outside, but I'm not sure what happened with it. They just came back to the house after playing and told my wife and I that Constance helped them with a mean doggy today, and she wasn't going to let the dog hurt them. We smiled and got set to making dinner. We go out to the graves often, clean them up and plant different flowers. I build a nice bench for us and Constance, so she can spend as much time as she wants there. I was going to have the gravestones professionally refurbished, but she doesn't seem to like others out at the site. It makes her a bit angry, and I start to see the old Constance. And let me tell you, I don't think I want to be on her bad side again. Fifth story. The tall, pale creature in the woods. I'd say I was 6, maybe 7, and it was midday. fairly bright out too. I was sitting on my uncle's lap. We were out and sitting on a lawn chair. Note that it is an extremely woodsy area, crammed with trees. We sat, talking and just looking around and enjoying the weather. And that was when I noticed something moving out of the corner of my eye. Me being the naturally curious child I was, I turned my head quickly to get a good look at the thing. I squinted my eyes. From what I could tell, it was extremely tall, and I mean tall. My height guess would be maybe 12 feet tall, but then again it was a decent distance away, so I could get an exact idea. But what I did know is that it was a skinny, bony creature. Its joints bulged out enough for me to even tell from where I was sitting. It was shaped somewhat like a person, so it was standing on two legs, but its limbs and everything were abnormal to it. And it wasn't wearing any clothes. But that's the thing. The creature didn't have any genitals. It was just really weird. Hell, even 6-year-old me knew this. But I wasn't scared, not in the slightest. Matter of fact, I tried squirming out of my uncle's arms, pointing at the creature, asking him to let me go to it. He laughed, and while looking in its direction said, "He looks kind of like you, doesn't he?" And I furrowed my eyebrows. What's that supposed to mean? I was extremely skinny at the time, never ate much. I, however, knew for a fact I looked nothing like that. And clearly he could see the tall looming figure, slowly making his way across. This made me angrier, and I squirmed more that he wasn't letting me run to it. Tiny me eventually gave up, and just watched the thing slowly walk across and into another patch of cluttered trees, where he disappeared off into. My uncle never brought up the experience again. Neither did I. This happened long ago, but I know what I saw, whatever it was. It's still a vibrant memory in my mind. My childhood was strange. I have many other weird experiences, but I decided to start with one of the first. To this day, I still wish I could have chased it. Don't know why, but I had an overwhelming urge to run to it. Maybe then, I would understand. Childhood is strange, but I think mine sits in this special category. I've always had weird stuff happen to me, or be around when it happens to others. At this point, I'd almost consider it just me having terrible luck. I've told many people around me this story, and they just always say, "Oh, you were too young to really know for sure what you saw was real." It must have been, surely? I mean, hell, my uncle even saw it. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.